Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So today we are going to talk about how the Republican Party often gets in its own way in entertaining ways. And we will talk about a pretty interesting scenario that has developed in Wyoming most recently, but it has happened in other places. So we have talked lately on the channel about how the Republican Party introduces wild legislation for the purposes of just energizing their base. It's a show. We have talked about this in particular in relation to the U.S. House of Representatives and how it's very likely that they're going to introduce a bunch of very extreme legislation that maybe it makes it through the Senate, but Biden will veto it, and the Republicans do not have the votes to override the veto. The habit, the tendency of the Republican Party to just manufacture some problem out of whole cloth and then propose a solution to it, that's not new. It's been around a really long time. And what they tend to do is they create some mythical scenario. This horrible thing is going to happen. And then they propose legislation to stop this horrible thing from happening that never would have happened to begin with. And then when it doesn't happen, it looks like their legislation was successful. They have been doing this a very long time. It's a good election strategy. It works. The Republican base is not necessarily great at discerning what is a real and what is a fictional problem. So it works for them when it comes to electoral success. However, while the problems are imaginary and the legislation is just a show, the legislation is real and it has real effects. Sometimes the effects of their show legislation end up being in direct opposition to the Republican Party on the rare occasions when they actually do have policy. A hilarious example of this just occurred in Wyoming. As some of you may know, Wyoming, they put through a pretty comprehensive ban on family planning. And then it went to the courts. The ban is currently not being enforced because back in the early 2010s, I want to say 2012, Wyoming introduced a bill, a constitutional amendment, to stop all of the horrible things that were going to occur because of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Part of this kind of prohibited a government takeover of healthcare. So when it goes before the judge is like, hey, can you explain to me how this isn't healthcare? I mean, it has to be done by a licensed medical professional. And they were like, huh? And because of the constitutional amendment that they put in place for an imaginary issue, they have successfully defeated their own legislation. Now, currently, this is a temporary thing, but reading through it, it's going to be really hard for them to argue through this. And even the judge kind of indicated that they believed it was the Republican Party trying to do an end run around the state constitution, which, I mean, yeah, that is kind of what they're doing. But they just didn't expect their constitutional amendment to, I don't know, ever be used. Now, this sounds like a one-off scenario. It's not. This happens more often than you might imagine. In fact, in Ohio, due to a 2011 constitutional amendment about health care, because, you know, they scared everybody about Obamacare. I'm sorry, the Affordable Care Act. As most Republicans will tell you, those are two very different things. Obamacare is bad and evil. The Affordable Care Act is what they use to get their health care, and that's good. Anyway, In Ohio, they did the same thing. They introduced the same kind of constitutional amendment, and it was also used to strike down their attempted ban there. Now, while all of this is humorous and it does go to show how the Republican Party creates imaginary issues and then defeats them, what we do need to keep in mind is that this is actually very serious. You have a number of states trying to deprive people of rights, and the only thing that is standing in their way is their habit of lying to their base and introducing legislation for made-up problems that just happens to be useful to stop their authoritarian march. So while, sure, take the win, but remember that this is not a fight that's over. It's going to continue. We can only hope that the Republican Party continues to enshrine more rights into state constitutions to defeat imaginary issues with health insurance. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.